He can have a reaction to Joe's video. Joe can have a reaction to my reaction of Tim's video. And we can just go around in a circle doing nothing but this
reactions,
forever.
Look at NASA, what they did. They did some stuff.
Tim's like, I have stuff to talk about, guys.
I'm sorry.
This
This is maybe
Talk
the biggest
stuff.
news. This is maybe the biggest news that's ever happened in my career covering spaceflight. So this is insane.
So did you guys see that commercial with the guy that? No, I'm just kidding.
I hate you so much. Okay, so here we go. This is why I'm excited. This is why I stayed up all night last night. So NASA, it came out this week that NASA is going to be announcing the actual lunar landers for the Artemis program. Of course, if we want to go back to the moon by 2024, maybe one of the most important aspects of that would be the lander, so you can, get to the moon.
You want to land on the moon.
Because don't forget, SLS and Orion can only get astronauts to the moon and get into lunar orbit. There hadn't been anything. I mean, there had been proposals and stuff to put people on the moon, but we didn't know what NASA was going to do. A lot of us assumed there'd be one, maybe two contractors would win a bid. But the cool thing is this is a fixed price contract, just like the Commercial Crew program. But what NASA ended up doing blew everyone away and completely ruined my 75-minute long video that I've been working on for 2 months. So remember how I'm doing NASA or SLS versus Starship? Well, guess what? They chose Starship as a lunar lander.
What?
That's like an old version of it too.
Starship. This is actually a new version. It looks like they'll probably paint it for reflectivity or something. We got a lot to talk about. It has no fins.
Yeah. Oh, this is
because
a new one.
It's only a lunar lander.
Holy crap. All right, yeah.
All right. So
what? Why can't they just jump out of that thing? Come on. You don't need an
So
elevator.
let me give you guys a rundown. 3 different companies, 3 different programs, 1 contracts. And these are so far just for the next year. By basically February-ish of 2021, each of these things will have to have really, really detailed assessments, including how they'll actually get there, really detailed plans and blueprints and business proposals and the actual dollar amounts for everything. But NASA is giving them the green light to go ahead and basically investing another $1 billion into these 3 companies. And those 3 companies are Blue Origin with their national team. That includes Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Draper. And what it is Blue Origin has the lander portion. Lockheed Martin has the ascent module that would actually, return astronauts from the surface of the moon back up to Gateway or back up to Orion to get back home. And Northrop Grumman has this transfer stage that gets from lunar orbit up to Gateway orbit. And Draper has they're developing some of the software and some of the logistics in that sense. Really, really cool. This is a very safe proposal, really kind of down the middle. The one that surprised, I think, honestly, as much as Starship was Dynetics has a robust team of more than 25 subcontractors. Look at this, like, bread loaf miniature dachshund landing on the moon. This is a belly lander, a lot of people are calling it, where it would land really low to the moon, so you don't have to have the crew module super high up with these large tanks offset to the sides. Pretty unique system, and there's 25 subcontractors working on this. And Dynetics is the lead on it, and they put all this team together, which is a really cool way to do things. And I don't know, I think that was probably pretty attractive to have that many contractors on it, so that those would spread throughout the states and help make it more appealing to Congress and things like that too. But then, of course, like I said, SpaceX won a bid as well. They didn't win everything; they won a bid. SpaceX won the least amount of money. I should probably pull that up here. Because I had that breakdown here real quick. It goes like this. SpaceX won where was that? SpaceX won $135 million for the next year's development. Dynetics won $253 million, and Blue Origin won $579 million. So I think kind of what that tells me, and I'm on no sleep, and I listened to the press conference that was really hard to hear on a telephone conference. So some of what I say now might outdate itself a little bit, but what it appears to me is that NASA has the most faith in Blue Origin as being the ride that will probably get them there safely by 2024. So don't forget a lot of what NASA's doing. This is actually, the more I look into this, and I'm really glad that I happen to be going down this rabbit hole already, because the more I look into this, the more I realize NASA is learning and shifting with the times and trying to not make mistakes from previous administrations and previous programs. So what they're doing is they're setting such an ambitious goal and fast tracking so many things that it'll finally be hard to cancel, and there'll be multiple revenue, multiple streams, multiple landers, multiple contractors, so many people roped into this that there'll be so much vested interest that it will finally actually happen. Like, finally, you know, I've wanted us to go back to the moon my whole life, as long as I've wanted to know that I'm living on Earth while there's people walking on the moon, and they're making it happen. And this is a really cool way to do it, which is basically, we're going to get astronauts to lunar orbit with SLS and Orion, because it's done. It's literally certified. All of the hardware is built for the first uncrewed, and we're on track to have another one ready to go with humans by 2023. And then 2024, we can land on the moon. So we'll get, basically NASA will get the astronauts to there. Then the commercial partners will have lunar landers. And in my opinion, they invested the least in Starship, because Starship is kind of pretty... If Starship lives up to its promise, it'll be the cheapest way to deliver it anyway. So SpaceX could, in theory, deliver this huge lunar lander for like hilariously cheap, and win contracts based on that. But it's also kind of a Hail Mary. Starship's just absurd altogether. So there's a lot of moving parts that have to be figured out, like in fuel reorbiting. The lander itself has auxiliary gas thrusters on top to be able to do the soft lunar landing, because we've talked about before how there's concerns about huge dust craters and all this stuff being kicked up from a massive vehicle like Starship. So there's a lot of other technologies that make it kind of the riskier choice, or at least the short-term risk but long-term reward. That's which is pretty cool.
What's that money for? Because it all seems like really, really tiny amounts compared to what's needed.
It's mostly to really
like
be able to finalize.
100-something million is like...
Well, I mean, it's enough to really, really, really draw out your system and do all the engineering, like proper engineering, not just like, you know, I don't know, not just like proposals or, you know, like paper rockets, but to actually say, hey, here's the engineering. Here's the exact engine we'll use. Here's the exact this. Really draw it out, really have it detailed, and then submitting that next year as their proper bid then for the proper contracts, really.
Okay, right. So this is like we're going to pay you to get us a bid.
Yep. And
right.
With potential that NASA could buy all three. They could still procure all three contracts. But this way, at least they have multiple good options, multi-path, that are not redundant or not, you know, reliant on each other to do this. So the odds of them actually having a lunar lander ready by 2024 with three people competing really hard for these bids, I think is really cool. And yeah, what do you guys think?
Is this the first thing that Blue Origin has bid with NASA?
Maybe. There might be some stuff that Blue Origin's already won with NASA, just with New Glenn for orbital things.
Okay.
But as far as I know, this is definitely
like scheduled launches, even though it hasn't gone.
Right. Because they've actually won they have a lot of contracts in the works, including I think even military contracts, where they're vying to try to get military contracts. But yeah, it's some legit stuff. Yeah.
You know, as excited as we get about SpaceX, and as fun as it is to watch Starship going through all the rigor and everything, when Blue Origin just like pops up with a New Glenn out of nowhere someday, that's going to be so amazing. We're all just going to be like, what?
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to that whenever that happens.
And I agree, especially again with this video that I had done. I know for a fact that Starship will work, but I know that there's so many unknowns that I can just see because it relies on a lot of untested, never done before things in order to fully realize its full potential. So that might not happen until like late 2020s. You know, look at how long it's taken. Look at how long it took just to get Falcon Heavy going. Look at how long it's taken just to get Dragon capsule going. relatively easy things. I'm using air quotes for those of you listening, but because I don't think anything in spaceflight's ever easy, but those are things that had been done before. And Starship is looking at 2 or 3 technologies that literally have never really been tried. And there's nothing physically impossible about them, but they are going to be extremely difficult things that could make that potential just a little bit further out. So I'm glad that we have a more traditional, maybe more conservative bids from the other companies to lead up to that too.
Are they going to have to send one up, land it on the moon, and bring it back without people before they can put people on it?
So what they'll do, they won't be bringing this one back at all. This one is only going to be like a lunar tug. It'll go from the surface of the moon.
So it's a lander. It's not a returner.
It's not a returner. The crew will still return on Orion. And the crew will still get to the moon on Orion, and they'll get home from the moon on Orion, because all of that technology is literally done and tested. Orion tested its heat shield in 2014 from orbit, like a full-blown flight. It's ready to go for lunar missions. And NASA, if they want to get their astronauts safely to the moon, it actually all makes sense. And it's this beautiful puzzle that I'm like, they actually did something really different. They have so many options that will get them to the moon safely. Will get them potentially to the moon actually by 2024 or 2025, but it'll definitely be far enough along that it won't get canceled, because a lot of those checks will be written now so that we can actually get to the moon. And then they have things in progress to make it so we can stay on the moon, that we can really have habitats and people as science experiments, all these big, cool things on the surface of the moon.
So the Starship wouldn't actually be coming to and from Earth. It would just be up there at the moon, being a shuttle between the gateway and the moon. The surface.
For what NASA is procuring from them now, yes.
This version of it.
This version. And so it'll be a kind of a special lunar-only version. It would still get there with super heavy. They'll still use a super heavy booster to loft it and, get it out to the moon. Once it's on the moon, it will have to be able to refuel itself. So that might be something that NASA and, there are a lot of companies and a lot of these development programs, especially with Eclipse missions, the commercial lunar program services, they're working on refueling techniques, and they're working on in situ resource utilization. So that will be part of basically how this all works. And the cool thing is, kind of like when SpaceX was trying to recover boosters during the CRS missions, learning how to land rockets, in the early 2013, 2014 era, now they're getting to test out portions of Starship and testing out in situ resource utilization and getting paid to do it because it's also functioning as something else while they work on the full thing. And eventually, once this is all kind of going and Starship's reliably doing this portion of it, eventually, SpaceX could, look, you guys, we trust your ascent. Let's skip SLS and Orion. We'll just stick our astronauts up on Starship, and you can just go straight from Starship to the moon and no big deal. But no rush. Why rush that out? And why rely on all those systems to actually get you there? Rely on all these risky ascent with no abort, risky refueling process, risky landing on the moon thing, blah, 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 risky reentry with Starship, when they have a solution now that's ready to go and actually paid for. So it's interesting. Yeah.
So, okay, when I hear the Blue Origin lander is 3 stages, which still kind of confuses me actually, but it's a 3-stage and there's a different company building each stage. That feels like extra complexity to me. Is that an unfounded concern in your mind?
Complexity, yes. I mean, they'll have to be basically pieced together on orbit and eventually pieced together at Gateway, but they could probably be pieced together on their own and likely pieced together from 2 or 3 launches even. So likely, the ascent stage and that transfer stage will be one launch on a New Glenn, and that lander stage will be another launch on a New Glenn, because that's how big these pieces are. These are heavy 30-plus ton landers, so twice as heavy as the Apollo minimum. Some of them 45. Starship 120 tons. These are huge vehicles, way bigger than the 16-ton Apollo lunar lander. And these rockets that would be launching them, including Starship, SLS, are actually less powerful than the Saturn V, or less capable. So it's going to take multiple rockets to get these pieces out there. Yes, then they assemble them. But the biggest reason is where Gateway will be and where Orion can park is in this orbit called the near rectilinear halo orbit. And it's just it's a low delta V. It's about as low a delta V as you can get to the moon in and stay around the moon. It's a very low delta V intense lunar orbit. So then to get from there, you have to still spend like another, I don't remember, like 2,800 or something, or 3,000 meters per second to get down to the surface of the moon. So basically they'll use that transfer stage. That's one stage, kind of like just like staging from Earth. You use one stage to do one portion of your journey, another stage that's more optimized for that. So the transfer stage can get it down into low lunar orbit. That transfer stage goes back up to Gateway, refuels, and is ready for the next lander. The lander then has the descent and ascent stage. The descent stage will go down, land, probably be, at first at least, the only part that's not reused. And then the ascent stage will be able to get them back up to Gateway and be refueled and blah, 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 blah. But eventually, there's potential that they could refuel the descent stage on the moon as well someday and have a fully reusable, some kind of really cool reusable system.
Well, I still think eventually that it's going to have to be fully reusable, or it's just going to be a whole bunch of like descent stage landers just like dotting the landscape down there, and
yeah,
well, they're going to have to do something with that eventually if there's going to be a long-term lunar base solution.
Well, how cool would it be though if there is just like a junkyard of descent stages?
So now we got
so
we're
pirates.
junking up. Yeah, we're junking up the moon now.
I mean, we already have 6 of them up there. What's another 60? I don't know. It's a big place. We got lots of room. Let's junk it.
If there's one thing humans are good at,
Yes.
it's leaving electronic waste everywhere.
Yeah. But I think this is just really, really genuinely the most exciting thing to really happen in spaceflight. And I'm just so excited to see NASA sprinting right now. NASA is like new blood. They are feeling good. They're feeling their oats and doing some new stuff that it will avoid some of the frustrations that we had with SLS and Orion. So I think this is just a really, really cool, great work by NASA. So I hope this reinvigorates people's excitement for NASA and doesn't make NASA seem like this old, out of touch grandpa, your grandpa's space program. I hope this makes people go, no, they're playing the game. They're still in it. They're doing the right moves. I'm just super excited. What were you going to say, Ben?
Well, just one thought I had related to what Joe was saying a bit about coordination and complexity, because, just obviously I haven't worked in aerospace, but I worked in a lot of industries. And whenever you have a lot of different companies trying to coordinate an effort, it tends to slow things down because the communication and all that, So that's one thing I hope they can avoid. I'm not sure how, but certainly I would just from a high level guess that SpaceX has an advantage in that front, because to my understanding, like they're building it all themselves, right? It's like, hey, I need to have a meeting with you, come here, versus like, oh, you want to talk to that company? Cool. Well, let's go talk to this guy who knows somebody over there. Like, so I think hopefully that'll give SpaceX an advantage in this whole thing. Or it might, but whoever can get us there, I'm stoked for. I just want my son to be able to see it before he's in high school.
Yeah, that'll happen. I think SpaceX is easily the most vertically integrated aerospace company, at least as far as launch services and all. And I mean, everything else. They build satellites now. They do it all. So even their own life support, they're very vertically integrated. And I definitely think that's a very, very good thing these days when now manufacturing is so it's so specialized, yet you can buy 3D printers and do all these things. I don't know. It's just a different game than it was, 50 years ago.
You can move faster when you don't have to ask someone else to do it for you.
But at the same time, I do appreciate the multi-contractor approach where we have, it leads that whole thing of like, what if one of them gets delayed? What if there's problems with one little subsystem on one of these contractors' things, and it can just throw a whole wrench in your entire thing? I don't know. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what wins out now.
Well, so to Ben's point, that's kind of what I was getting at with my concerns about the multiple contractors and stuff, just communication issues and delays and whatnot. But I mean,
It
that's what
depends how they
Apollo
do it.
was. I mean, Apollo was Douglas and Northrop Grumman and Boeing and all these different companies that, I mean, every single piece of the Saturn V and the command module and lunar module was like handled by a different company. So
even General Motors. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's, every spread throughout the country. And this will be a good time, though. We have one company that's working with 24 contractors, one that's 3 and one that's 1. And this will be a great case study to see who gets there first.
That's actually a good point.
I think it's how they go about it too. You know, I've worked in those situations where like we had a bunch of people from different companies, but we all came to the same building, got together in kind of a scrum room and just coded our hearts out and made something happen immediately, even though it was a bunch of us. And then I've been in other situations where it's like, oh, okay, well, that's a request for them and there's a formal process for that and yada, yada, yada. And there's all this red tape and just nothing gets done. So hopefully these guys can figure it out. That's super exciting, though. You're right. That's awesome.
Hey, thanks for checking us out, guys. I hope you enjoyed this clip from our podcast.
We do a weekly show here on YouTube, so make sure to subscribe to Our Ludicrous Future, where we discuss all the things that are going to make our future totally ludicrous.
You can join us here on YouTube or at any of your favorite podcast places. Plus, if you want to get some behind-the-scenes stuff and join a cool community, you can help support the channel at patreon.com. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.